Chapter 287. Raytheon was not the only one. Almost at the same time, the Snow God Palace, the Kuragenkyo, and other major sects welcomed their most powerful ancestors. The far north ice field. A woman in a palace dress had appeared outside the Snow God Palace. The woman in the palace dress stood there quietly. Her temperament was weak, just like an ordinary person. But if one looked closely, one would find that there was a world of ice in the depths of her eyes. When they saw the woman in the palace dress, all the disciples and elders of the Snow God Palace who had come to the battlefield bowed and greeted her respectfully. "Ancestor, did you wake up this time because the critical point of the recovery of the vital chi tide is approaching?" The deputy palace master of the Snow God Palace asked the woman in the palace dress carefully. "That's right." The woman in the palace dress looked indifferent, like an iceberg that would not melt for thousands of years. She said softly, "I also want to meet the legend of the Empire of Tang with my friends." The deputy palace master of the Snow God Palace was slightly shocked when she heard this. She quickly said, "But Ancestor just said that the legend of Chang and City destroyed the Wanjian school by himself. His strength is unfathomable," the deputy palace master of the Snow God Palace said hesitantly. When she learned from the woman in the palace dress that the destruction of the Wanjian school was caused by Su Qin, she was extremely shocked. Now that she heard that her ancestor wanted to meet Su Qin, she was obviously worried. "Don't worry." The woman in the palace dress shook her head slightly and said contemptuously, "The Wanjian school has only been around for 4,000 years. How can it compare to the Snow God Palace?" In the entire Wanjian school, Kanzu was the only one who had transformed his primordial spirit in the past 2,000 years. But even so, Kanzu's body died of old age a long time ago. Without the nourishment of his body, his Yuan spirit is like a rootless duckweed. Besides, many of our killing moves rely on our bodies. Kanzu doesn't have a physical body and can only rely on his soul to maintain a large portion of his combat strength. But in a battle between cultivators of the same level, even the slightest difference can affect the outcome of the battle, much less when one side has lost their physical body. The woman's tone was flat and monotonous. Kanzu, who only had a primordial spirit body, could easily deal with a legend below the primordial spirit. However, when facing an existence of the same level, he would pale in comparison. The woman was not surprised that Su Qin had killed Kanzu because she was confident that she could do the same. As for destroying Wanjian school, after all, the Wanjian school was the orthodoxy left behind by an earth immortal. Su Qin was able to destroy the Wanjian school, so his strength must have surpassed the peak legend who had transformed into a primordial spirit. However, the woman was not going to Chang and City alone this time. Instead, she was going with several fellow cultivators from other major sections. With several peak legends who had transformed into a primordial spirit working together, no matter how strong Su Qin was, as long as he did not set foot in the territory of an earth immortal, they would have nothing to fear. This was also the biggest source of confidence for the woman in the palace dress. At this moment, Chang'an City. Inside the palace, Su Qin went into seclusion for a while. After stabilizing his primordial spirit, he returned to the East Palace and gave guidance to Family Su's cultivation. After all, Su Qin had gone overseas for several months. Naturally, he wanted to see the progress of Family Su's martial arts. "Qin, you've broken through again?" Outside the right spring square, Su Shimin was practicing the Arhat fist. This Arhat fist was a fist technique that Su Qin had brought out from the Shaolin Temple. It was a basic fist technique. However, at this moment, in Su Shimin's hands, it showed a different kind of demeanor. It was as if the real venerable Arhat was punching. It was simple and majestic. As it stretched and unfolded, a large amount of heaven and earth's essence chi surged into Su Shimin's body and increased his cultivation base. "A slight breakthrough," Su Qin said casually. For other peak legends, transforming into a primordial spirit was already a qualitative change. Once a primordial spirit was formed, it could break free from the shackles of the physical body, travel thousands of miles, and be reborn. It was simply unbelievable. However, in Su Qin's eyes, it was indeed a slight breakthrough. It was only a matter of time. Qin, your slight breakthrough in the eyes of mortals like us is probably all the breakthroughs between an ordinary person and a martial arts legend. As Su Shimin spoke, he continued to practice the Arhat fist. Father, your strength is advancing very quickly. There is hope for you to reach the myth realm. Su Qin looked at Su Shimin's Arhat fist, and a smile appeared on his face. In just a few years, Su Shimin had already become a second-grade grandmaster from a fifth-grade grandmaster. He was only a step away from the first-grade grandmaster realm. Of course, this was due to the essence chi tide and the elixir cultivation method that Su Qin had given him, but it was also due to Su Shimin's own hard work. Although I used to like martial arts, I knew that my conditions did not allow it. Now that I have Qin's help, if I can't make any progress, I might as well be a rich man and spend the rest of my life. When Su Shimin said this, he paused for a while, as if thinking of something, and sighed softly. It's a pity that Yuan is not interested in martial arts. Otherwise, I would definitely drag him to practice with me. The Yuan that Su Shimin mentioned was the current crown prince of the Empire of Tang, Li Yuan. Compared with Li Yuan, who was addicted to martial arts since childhood and always followed Su Qin around all day, Li Yuan was the opposite. He had no interest in martial arts at all and devoted himself to state affairs. Everyone has their own path to walk. Su Qin shook his head slightly and said lightly. He had already given Li Yuan a choice. If the other party insisted on giving up martial arts, it had nothing to do with Su Qin. Su Qin chatted with Su Shimin for a while, and after walking around the palace, he returned to the majestic underground hall again. Let's set up this Buddhist lamp first. With a thought, Su Qin saw a slowly burning Buddhist lamp appear in front of him. This Buddhist lamp was the 10,000 spirits Buddhist lamp that Su Qin obtained in the 10,000 Buddhas hall. When the wick is lit, it is invulnerable. Of course, the invulnerability here was only relative. At the very least, this 10,000 spirits Buddhist lamp would not be able to block Su Qin's attack. But no matter what, this Buddhist lamp was still a very rare Buddhist treasure. After hanging the 10,000 spirits Buddhist lamp at the top of the majestic hall and letting its faint Buddhist light envelop the entire hall, Su Qin once again took out a yellow flag. It was the Wutu flag. The Wutu flag was a treasure that Su Qin obtained from signing in at the origin of the earth element. It contained several earth element arrays. As long as the Wutu flag was inserted, the arrays would automatically operate, which was very convenient. As the Wutu flag was inserted into the hall, in an instant, the entire hall was faintly shrouded in layers of yellow light. Under the cover of the array in the Wutu flag, the entire underground black majestic hall seemed to have completely disappeared. Even if a peak myth level divine sense were to scan it, they would not be able to detect it at all. Not bad. It even has its own concealment effect. A smile appeared on Su Qin's face. He was very satisfied. With his attainments in the formation path, setting up a concealment heaven and earth grade array was just a matter of a thought. However, once the heaven and earth grade array was set up, it would need to be maintained and nurtured every once in a while. It was unlike the Wutu flag, where as long as the treasure itself was not destroyed, the great array would continue to exist. Now that my primordial spirit is formed and my territory is stable, it's time to consider breaking through to the great Arhat realm. Su Qin sat cross-legged and stopped cultivating. Instead, he pondered in his heart. If I want to enter the great Arhat realm, I need my primordial spirit to merge with the primordial spirit ocean and draw in the endless primordial spirit to forge my Dharma body. However, the primordial spirit ocean varies in depth. The primordial spirit ocean at the shallow end and the primordial spirit ocean at the deep end are obviously on a different level. Su Qin thought silently in his heart. When an ordinary peak myth level Earth Immortal attempted to break through to the Earth Immortal realm, it would be a blessing if they could successfully merge with the primordial spirit ocean. Who would dare to consider the depth of the primordial spirit ocean? Originally, I planned to use the picture of the Great Sun as the foundation and merge my primordial spirit with the primordial spirit ocean. The picture of the Great Sun is the embodiment of the essence of the most powerful fire-type divine beast, the three-legged golden crow. It can definitely bring my primordial spirit to the deepest part of the primordial spirit ocean. However, my picture of the Great Sun is only at the entry level. This level of picture of the Great Sun only allows me to possess a wisp of the three-legged golden crow's aura. It can't be used in the primordial spirit ocean at all. When Su Qin thought of this, his eyes narrowed slightly. If it was only to enter the great Arhat realm, Su Qin could have touched it when he was at the earth elemental source in the 10,000 Buddhas hall. However, Su Qin rejected it. Even among the land immortals, there was a distinction between high and low. If Su Qin stepped into this realm, he naturally hoped that he would leave the other land immortals far behind him. At least the picture of the Great Sun at the small mastery level allows me to possess some of the three-legged golden crow's divine ability talent. Only then can it lead me into the deeper level of the primordial spirit ocean. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated. The cultivation of the picture of the Great Sun was divided into 3 levels. Entry, small mastery, large mastery. As long as the picture of the Great Sun was completed, it would be equivalent to completely cultivating the picture of the Great Sun. At that time, Su Qin would be able to transform into the most powerful fire-type divine beast, the three-legged golden crow. As for entry and small mastery, the entry-level picture of the Great Sun could allow Su Qin to possess a wisp of the three-legged golden crow's aura. As for small mastery, it would allow Su Qin to possess some of the three-legged golden crow's divine ability. Thinking of this, Su Qin glanced at the fire-type magic pills and treasures that were piled up in a certain location in the system space. Over the years, most of Su Qin's sign-in opportunities were used in the underground volcano in the cathodic city of the cave world. As a result, he obtained a large number of fire-type magic pills and other fire-type treasures. However, Su Qin wasn't sure whether these fire-type magic pills and treasures could push his picture of the Great Sun to small mastery, because his sign-in time at the underground volcano under the cathodic city of the cave world was too short. If he was given another 10 years to obtain more fire-type magic pills and treasures, Su Qin was confident that he would be able to push the picture of the Great Sun to small mastery. Whatever. Let's give it a try first. Su Qin calmed down and suddenly made a decision in his heart. Next, Su Qin once again fell into seclusion. Time passed slowly. Half a year passed in the blink of an eye. During this half-year period, Su Qin had been swallowing countless fire-type magic pills and treasures, constantly pushing the picture of the Great Sun towards small mastery. On a certain day, Su Qin quietly opened his eyes. The moment Su Qin opened his eyes, screech! An invisible roar burst out, and in the depths of Su Qin's eyes, a great sun that seemed to be burning eternally appeared. And in the depths of the Great Sun, a three-legged divine bird roared towards the sky, and terrifying flames suddenly erupted, burning heaven and earth. Chapter 288. It's a pity. After a long time, Su Qin closed his eyes again, and when he opened them again, they had returned to normal. The scene in Su Qin's eyes just now was just some memory fragments of the three-legged golden crow that he received when he was cultivating the Great Sun painting. It was just an image, not a real three-legged golden crow. I'm still a little bit away from cultivating the Great Sun painting to minor accomplishment. Su Qin whispered to himself. In this half a year, Su Qin had already swallowed all the fire elemental demonic pills and all the golden crows in the system space. As a result, he had fiercely advanced a part of the cultivation of the picture of the Great Sun, but he was still a distance away from the true minor accomplishment. Do I have to wait a few more years and sign in enough fire attribute demonic cores before breaking through? Su Qin frowned slightly. Now with the continuous recovery of the vitality tide, coupled with the continuous arrival of the peak mythical aura from the overseas major sects, Su Qin suddenly felt a sense of urgency in his heart. Su Qin was not afraid of the Wanjian school, a major sect that has only existed for more than 4,000 years, but Su Qin was still a little afraid of the other major sects, especially the major sects that have existed since the last vitality tide era. He didn't know how much heritage these major sects have, and maybe they have the means of an earth immortal. Just as Su Qin was thinking, buzz! Between the vast heaven and earth, The vitality was surging, as if it had undergone some kind of sublimation, reaching a certain critical point, and began to rise rapidly. Endless fire elemental power gathered from all directions and landed hundreds of miles away from Xianxia and City, forming a mountain range that was burning with raging flames. The mountain range was not very vast, but it was still dozens of miles. The endless power of fire condensed into fire dragons, constantly sweeping through every corner of the mountain range. Suddenly, all the martial artists in the upper realm and above looked up thoughtfully at the flame mountain range. The martial artists in the upper realm began to bear the world's essence chi, and they could faintly feel the majestic world's essence chi between heaven and earth. The endless world's essence chi consumed when the flame mountain was formed naturally attracted the attention of countless martial artists. That is, inside the palace, the old man, Fei Yu, was overwhelmed with shock. His face was filled with disbelief. The Lao Dao practitioner from the Dao school felt the same way as Yan Hai, Ruanqing, and the others. They were in Xianxia and City, so they naturally had a deep impression of the newly formed flame mountain range hundreds of miles away. This is the fire elemental origin, a fire elemental origin condensed by heaven and earth. The old man Fei Yu's voice trembled as he spoke in disbelief. 5 elemental sources such as the fire elemental source and the earth elemental source generally required thousands of years of nurturing before they could form. But now, under the continuous rise of the chi of heaven and earth, a fire elemental source that was hard to come by in 1,000 years was forming at a speed visible to the naked eye. This is an opportunity, a truly great opportunity. A great opportunity that only appears in the land of great struggle. Fei Yu's face was filled with fanaticism. The sources of the 5 elements were extremely rare. Even during the peak of the previous vitality tide, there were not many of them. Any fully matured source of the 5 elements could help a pinnacle myth more easily integrate his primordial spirit into the sea of vitality in the depths of the void. How incredible was this? It must be known that the further one goes in martial arts cultivation, the less help external forces can bring. It was simply shocking to think that the fire elemental source could increase the possibility of entering the earth immortal realm. Not good. Trouble. After the excitement, the old man Fei Yu's face suddenly changed. Over the past 6 months, mythical martial artists from the major sects had entered the Empire of Tang. Although the Emperor of Tang was concerned about this, as long as these mythical martial artists from the major sects didn't cause any trouble, he wouldn't stop them. Firstly, he was worried that it would cause the dissatisfaction of all the overseas major sects. Secondly, if the Empire of Tang really wanted to catch up with these major sects, it must have more contact with them. And under the deterrence of Su Qin, these mythical martial artists from the major sects, after entering the Empire of Tang, were well behaved. Even the Xianxia disciples who had always liked to kill, didn't dare to kill in the Empire of Tang for fear of attracting Su Qin's attention. However, the old man Fei Yu knew that the premise of these mythical martial artists not attacking was that the Empire of Tang didn't have anything to attract them. But now, this newly formed fire elemental source was enough to arouse the greed in the hearts of all the mythical martial artists. Moreover, because the fire elemental source was only a few hundred miles away from Xianxia and City, the aftermath of the fight between these mythical martial artists was very likely to spread to Xianxia and City. As for Su Qin's deterrence, in front of the fire elemental source, it would definitely attract the full force of the major sects. How could they give up because of Su Qin? Just when the old man Fei Yu's face turned ugly, a faint voice suddenly sounded in his ear. It turned out to be a newly formed fire elemental source. Su Qin's figure appeared silently beside him, looking in the direction of the Flame Mountain range, and said softly, "My lord." The old man Fei Yu's heart tightened, and he immediately bowed to Su Qin. "Get up." Su Qin waved his hand, and his eyes flashed with a hint of fiery passion. Now his great sun painting was still a little short of minor accomplishment. Originally, Su Qin thought that it would take a few more years to get enough fire elemental treasures to devour before he could step into minor accomplishment. But now, the appearance of this fire elemental source made Su Qin overjoyed. The fire elemental source was condensed from the endless fire elemental energy between heaven and earth, and it was the best fuel for cultivating the great sun painting. A complete fire elemental source would definitely allow the cultivation of the great sun painting to advance by leaps and bounds. Not to mention great accomplishment, at least minor accomplishment wouldn't be a problem. Once the great sun painting reached minor accomplishment, Su Qin could use it to integrate his primordial spirit into the sea of vitality and take that step. Come with me for a while. Su Qin glanced at Fei Yu and said casually. After all, the old man Fei Yu was a peak myth, and his strength wasn't weak. When Su Qin was devouring the fire elemental source, if there was anything, he could instruct Fei Yu to do it. Yes. Hearing this, the old man Fei Yu said respectfully. At the same time, in front of the Flame Mountain Range, with the rise of heaven and earth's essence Qi, a group of powerhouses had already rushed here. These powerhouses basically came from the major sections. When the heaven and earth's essence Qi was sublimated, they happened to be nearby, so they could rush over immediately. Here, is this the legendary fire elemental source? A tall man with a faint flash of lightning in his eyes looked at the Flame Mountain Range in front of him with a burning gaze. He was Elder Raytheon, a fifth heavenly layer myth. Naturally, he knew what the fire elemental source meant. That's right. It's exactly the same as what was recorded in the sect. Legend has it that when the vitality tide recovers, an unprecedented opportunity will appear in the land of great battle. Now it seems that the rumors are true. Another man with a cold face sighed with emotion. As myths, they should be able to control heaven and earth, but at this moment, in front of this Flame Mountain Range, they had an illusion that they were as small as dust. The cold man knew that this was entirely because the fire elemental source was formed by the convergence of the endless fire elemental energy of heaven and earth. Facing the fire elemental source was like facing the endless fire elemental energy of heaven and earth. In front of a real vitality ocean, even earth immortals were like dust, let alone them. It's indeed the fire elemental source, but don't forget that this is the territory of the myth of the Empire of Tang. Do you think you can snatch the fire elemental source from him? At this time, a woman who was the furthest away from the fire elemental source sneered. As soon as these words came out, everyone's expression changed. Half a year had passed, and the news of Su Qin destroying Wanjian School had already spread to their ears. Everyone present knew about Su Qin's methods. That's right. It's indeed difficult for us to resist the myth of the Empire of Tang. Speaking of this, the cold man suddenly changed the topic, but although the myth of the Empire of Tang is powerful, we are not afraid of him. Just now, I have already sent a message to the sect, and some ancestors are already rushing here. As the cold man spoke, he looked at the Flame Mountain Range with incomparable greed. Although it was impossible for him to enjoy the fire elemental source, the credit of discovering the fire elemental source was enough to raise his status in the sect, and he even had a chance to compete for the position of the sect leader. Although many of the sect leaders of the great sects had to deal with trivial matters, they also received the most distribution of martial arts cultivation resources. That's true. So what if the myth of the Empire of Tang has transformed his primordial spirit? So what if he destroyed Wanjian School? The real heritage of the great sects that we have accumulated for thousands of years is not something that can be subverted by a single martial artist. Elder Raytheon, who was the first to speak, said slowly. His words immediately resonated with the others. The great sects had stood at the top of the overseas martial arts world for thousands of years. What kind of glory was that? Even in the era where there were earth immortals, these great sects still stood tall. No matter how strong Su Qin was, could he be stronger than an earth immortal? Even an earth immortal could not do anything to the great sections. What could Su Qin use to shake them? The reason why many of the great sects did not take action before was entirely because they did not have enough benefits. In addition, they were afraid of each other and kept each other in check. That was how they maintained the current situation. They sat back and watched the Empire of Tang occupy the most important territory in the land of the Great Battle. But now, the appearance of the fire elemental source gave many of the great sects a good reason to come forward. Moreover, in the face of the fire elemental source, many of the great sects would completely abandon their previous grudges and join forces to deal with Su Qin. After all, in the eyes of the great sects, no matter who the fire elemental source belonged to, it could only be chosen among them. As for Su Qin, an outsider, what right did he have to get his hands on such a treasure? If that legend from the Empire of Tang dares to appear, my sect's ancestor will definitely make him unable to return. Elder Raytheon had a proud look on his face. He knew very well that half a year ago, Ancestor Lei Xing had already arrived at the land of the great battle. As early as 1,000 years ago, Ancestor Lei Xing had already transformed into a primordial spirit. Moreover, compared to Kanzu, who had a physical body, Ancestor Lei Xing's physical body was still there and could exert his strongest combat strength. With a veteran legend like Ancestor Lei Xing who had transformed his primordial spirit, why would Raytheon need to be afraid of Su Qin? However, just as everyone was discussing the ownership of the fire elemental source, a terrifying aura, like an ancient divine mountain, shrouded down. Under the cover of this aura, everyone present felt as if they had been struck by lightning. They all knelt on the ground as if they were welcoming a supreme immortal god. Who is it? Elder Raytheon raised his head with difficulty and looked into the distance. He saw that at the end of his line of sight, a slender and tall figure was walking towards him unhurriedly. Everything in the world seemed to be under his feet, as if an immortal king was patrolling the sky, overlooking the three realms. Chapter 289. In front of the Flame Mountain Range. Just when many legends were looking at the source of fire in front of them with a fiery gaze, a slender silhouette walked over from 100 miles away. It was as if an immortal king was patrolling the heavens, magnificent and vast. Although he was still 100 miles away, his terrifying aura swept across, causing all the legends to tremble in their hearts. They couldn't muster up any intention to resist. It's the legend of the Empire of Tang. The man with a cold face stammered, his teeth chattering. When the others heard this, their hands and feet suddenly went cold, as if they had fallen into a bottomless abyss. Although they showed strong confidence just now, at this moment, when they really faced such a peerless expert who had destroyed Wanjian School, everyone realized how ignorant they were just now. Perhaps the major sects behind them could barely stand at the same height as Su Qin, but for them, in front of Su Qin, they were like ants. How did this legend of the Empire of Tang come so quickly? Someone swallowed, his face full of shock. Don't. In an instant, under everyone's gaze, Su Qin crossed 100 miles and came to the Flame Mountain Range. Greetings, Senior. The legends who had long knelt on the ground could no longer bear it and hurriedly bowed. Su Qin stopped and ignored the legends who were kneeling on the ground. Instead, his eyes were fixed on the Flame Mountain Range in front of him. Is this the source of fire? Su Qin felt the surging power of fire in the mountain range, and his face was thoughtful. The 5 elemental sources were divided into 5 elements, and the forms they showed were different. For example, the earth elemental source was in the form of a hill, valley, or even a mountain range, while the water elemental source may be a lake, a river, or even an ocean. The most peculiar ones were the thunder elemental source, yin elemental source, yang elemental source, and so on. They had no specific form at all, and could be a thunderbolt or a wisp of yang qi, yin qi, and so on. However, the fire elemental source in front of him was obviously much more flamboyant than the earth elemental source that Su Qin had encountered. The aura of the source of earth element in the pantheon of Buddhas in the western desert had been restrained to the extreme. Even Su Qin might have overlooked it if he was not careful. However, the source of fire element in front of him had exposed its aura. As soon as it appeared, it shocked the Empire of Tang. My lord, this fire elemental source shouldn't have been successfully nurtured yet. Fei Yu, the old man at the side, observed carefully and said in a low voice. Not bad. Su Qin nodded slightly and said indifferently, but it will be soon. This source of fire element was self-manifested when the tide of vitality reached a certain critical point. Its cultivation speed was far faster than the other sources of the 5 elements. According to Su Qin's estimation, after a few days, the source of fire element would be completely cultivated. In fact, the moment Su Qin saw the source of the fire element, he could feel that the stone tablet that symbolized the great sun diagram in his body suddenly stirred, as if it was yearning for something. As expected, the source of fire element is one of the best resources to cultivate the great sun diagram. Su Qin touched his chin and stabilized the great sun diagram stone tablet that was constantly vibrating. Although the great sun diagram was now eager to devour the source of fire element, Su Qin knew that only when the source of fire element was completely mature would it be able to exert its greatest effect. At that time, devouring it would be of the greatest help to him. After Su Qin took a few more glances at the source of fire element, he set his eyes on the many myths kneeling on the ground. Just now, you wanted me to come here but never return? Su Qin looked at Elder Raytheon not far away and said calmly. Long before coming to the source of fire element, Su Qin had used the power of his spirit to cover a radius of hundreds of miles. The conversation between the many myths on the field naturally fell into Su Qin's ears. No, Senior, I was wrong, please spare my life. Elder Raytheon was scared out of his wits and kowtowed again and again. Logically speaking, you are not a peak myth, I am bullying you. Su Qin looked down at Elder Raytheon and said slowly. Yes. Senior's mind is as vast as the sea, your magical power is endless. Elder Raytheon was overjoyed and quickly said. When the other myths on the field heard this, their hearts suddenly rose with hope. If Su Qin disdained to bully the weak and let Elder Raytheon go, he would not have attacked them. In other words, these myths were able to save their lives in front of a peerless former who had at least transformed his spirit. However, before everyone could finish rejoicing, Su Qin kept shaking his head and said, "It's a pity." In Su Qin's eyes, a cluster of flames suddenly ignited. The flames continued to soar and finally burst out, burning Elder Raytheon in front of him into nothingness. Su Qin stepped into the martial Dao for decades, and the last thing he cared about was bullying the weak. Otherwise, when the Mengyuan Empire invaded, he would not have directly burned the Mengyuan Empire's millions of foreign troops. For Su Qin, cultivating martial Dao and constantly becoming stronger was to follow his heart and follow his heart. How could he be constrained by other things? The rest of the myths on the field listened to Elder Raytheon's screams and bowed their heads. Their bodies trembled more and more, fearing that in the next moment, the flames that burned everything would fall on them. None of the myths thought of running away. As disciples of the major sects, everyone on the field knew that in front of a powerhouse like Su Qin, the only way to survive was to show their respect. As for running away, what can you use to escape? Even if you do your best and use all kinds of secret and forbidden techniques, can you escape from the domain? Can you escape from the spirit scan? Su Qin raised his hand and killed a few more people. These people had just said that when their old ancestor appeared, they would make the empire of Tang surrender under their feet. Finally, Su Qin looked at the man with a cold face. Senior, aren't you afraid that the old ancestor will take revenge on you? The cold man's voice trembled, but he still mustered up his courage and said. The cold man was very clear in his heart that if he didn't speak, he was afraid that he would be turned into ashes like the previous people. Under the pressure of life and death, even if the cold man knew that his words were very likely to anger Su Qin, he couldn't care less. Anyway, if he didn't speak, he would definitely die. If he spoke, at most, he would die. But if there was a trace of fear in Su Qin's heart, it would be his hope to live. Revenge. Just based on your Black Source sects group of trash who are neither human nor ghost? A trace of sarcasm appeared on Su Qin's face. The man with a cold face was one of the Kuragenkyo elders, but at this moment, the Kuragenkyo man, who claimed to be able to transform between illusion and reality at will, under the gaze of Su Qin, was completely cut off from the illusion, and even moving was extremely difficult. In an instant, under the desperate look of the cold man, His body began to burn again and quickly turned into nothingness. Just when all the myths were trembling in their hearts. In an instant, a voice suddenly resounded in everyone's ears. Trash? Fellow Taoist, you really have a big tone. My Xianxia has been at the top of the world for thousands of years, but in the mouth of fellow Taoist, we have become trash? The sky suddenly darkened, and an incomparably deep, but illusory figure slowly walked over. This figure seemed to be walking between illusion and reality, as if the two coexisted, but also as if the two were separate, giving people a very contradictory feeling. That is that the Xianxia's abyssal ancestor? The moment many myths saw this figure, their scalps suddenly exploded, and cold sweat quickly emerged on their foreheads. Compared to other peak myths who have transformed into primordial spirit, the Xianxia's abyssal ancestor is an extremely terrifying existence. The Xianxia's cultivation method has flaws, and it can't transform into primordial spirit, let alone enter the earth immortal realm. But if the Xianxia's fundamental devil cultivation method is cultivated to the extreme, and one step further, they can transform themselves into the nightmare form. In the nightmare form, they will obtain the power of nightmare, which is enough to compete with the power of primordial spirit, and even in a strange degree, it is several times more difficult to deal with than the ordinary power of primordial spirit. This is also the reason why the Xianxia has been standing overseas for thousands of years. Although the Xianxia has never had an earth immortal, but for thousands of years, there has been an ancestor in the nightmare form. The deterrent power of an ancestor who maintains the nightmare form is definitely above the ordinary peak primordial spirit myth. Oh! Su Qin looked at the Xianxia's abyssal ancestor. With Su Qin's eyesight, he naturally saw through the abyssal ancestor's details at a glance. At this time, the aura that the abyssal ancestor showed was much stronger than that of Kanzu from Wanjian school. This is normal. After all, Kanzu has lost his physical body for hundreds of years, and the power of his primordial spirit has already begun to decline. How can he be compared to the abyssal ancestor? You dare to stand in front of me alone? Aren't you afraid that I will refine your nightmare form? Su Qin's expression was calm as he lightly said. If he had not transformed into primordial spirit, he could have defeated the abyssal ancestor with only half a step into the level of Dharma body, but it would have been difficult to make him stay. Is that so? What if I join in? Another cold voice was heard, and everyone looked over subconsciously, only to see a woman standing in the world of ice slowly walking over. To be precise, the woman was not standing in the world of ice, but with every step she took, a terrifying aura spread in all directions, forcibly lowering the surrounding temperature. This is? Suddenly, everyone's expression changed greatly. The disciples of the snow god's palace almost jumped for joy. Greetings, ancestor. Immediately, a disciple of the snow god palace turned his head and kowtowed loudly. Another legend who has transformed into a primordial spirit? Fei Yu, the old man next to Su Qin, looked solemn. However, before the old man Fei Yu could react, the rumbling sound of thunder suddenly rang out. At the end of the sky, a terrifying thunderbolt suddenly appeared. In the blink of an eye, the thunderbolt descended in front of everyone and turned into a tall man. His aura was like the power of heaven, spreading all over the place. I heard that you are good at the way of thunder. Today, I, Raytheon, would like to ask you for advice. Is your way of thunder superior to the world, or is my thunder technique that has been passed down for thousands of years better? The tall man looked at Su Qin and said word by word. With the appearance of the tall man, there was an instant uproar. Countless people were dumbfounded and looked at the scene in front of them in disbelief. Thunder God sects ancestor Lei Xing? The old man, Fei Yu, sucked in a breath of cold air. Compared to the previous two people, ancestor Lei Xing's fame was much greater. After all, lightning was a kind of heavenly might. When experts of the same level fought, there were very few who could block the terrifying power of lightning. Something big has happened, Fei Yu murmured in a low voice. Chapter 290. In front of the Flame Mountain Range. Everyone was shocked. Although the Kuragenkyo's ancestor Yuan had not transformed into a primordial spirit, his strength was not weaker than that of an ordinary primordial spirit powerhouse. Coupled with the Snow God Palace and Raytheon, a total of 3 primordial spirit transforming legends were gathered here. It was simply earth-shattering. Even overseas, such a major event had not happened for hundreds or thousands of years. It must be known that the time of a primordial spirit transforming legend was precious. Which one of them was not cultivating in seclusion to take that step forward? How could they casually appear in front of the world? It is recorded in the ancient books of my sect that 900 years ago, many of the great sects and clans fought for a certain item. They used all their resources, and the lives of myth realm martial artists in that era were like grass. Is the scene from 900 years ago going to repeat itself? A myth realm martial artist's voice trembled, and his face was full of horror. Once a myth realm martial artist who had transformed into a primordial spirit made a move, under the collision of the power of the primordial spirit and the power of the domain, even if it was an insignificant aftershock, it was enough to crush these martial artists who had not even stepped into the myth realm. Raytheon? Su Qin raised his head and looked at Ancestor Lei Xing. Among the 3, Ancestor Lei Xing's aura was the strongest, as dazzling as a bright thunderbolt. Whether it was the Kuragenkyo's ancestor Yuan or the Snow God Palace's ancestor Yuan, they were all weaker in front of Lei Xing. This kind of weakness was not a weakness in the level of strength. After all, everyone had transformed into a primordial spirit and were at the same level. It was that the aura of Ancestor Lei Xing was too strong. Your Excellency, we came here together not to make things difficult for you, but this source of fire will belong to us. In addition, you have the core area of the battlefield occupied by the Empire of Tang. As long as you hand over this area, we can let you live. The Kuragenkyo's ancestor Yuan said faintly. Although a deputy leader and an ancestor of the Kuragenkyo had fallen in the hands of Su Qin, it was nothing to the ancestor Yuan. The Kuragenkyo had always been selfish. Why would they care about this? Not bad. In the distance, the ancestor of the Snow God Palace, who seemed to be standing in a world of ice, spoke softly. No matter what, Su Qin was a pinnacle legend who had transformed into a primordial spirit. If the 3 of them joined forces, they might be able to suppress him, but they could not guarantee that they would be able to survive Su Qin's counterattack. Perhaps 1 or 2 of them would be seriously injured or even killed. Once a pinnacle legend who had transformed into a primordial spirit went all out, it would be an extremely terrifying thing. You killed Kenzu, and although you are not weak, Kenzu's mortal body has long decayed and only his Yuan Shen is left. He has the Yuan Shen level but not the strength of his Yuan Shen. How can he be compared to our mortal bodies and Yuan Shen? Ancestor Lei Xing sneered as he looked at Su Qin with confidence. When the other 2 patriarchs heard this, they immediately nodded slightly. Obviously, they agreed with Patriarch Lei Xing's words. It was true that the soul could break free from the shackles of the body, but if it lost the body, the battle prowess that the soul could unleash would definitely be reduced, and it would be unable to use many of its abilities. Of course, whether it was Patriarch Lei Xing or the other 2 patriarchs, they had never thought that Su Qin did not transform into a primordial spirit when he killed Kenzu. If they knew about this, they would definitely turn around and leave, not daring to stay for even a moment. Even if he lost the nourishment of his mortal body, his primordial spirit was still a primordial spirit. The power of the primordial spirit was vast and mighty, and it could easily defeat all the pinnacle legends who had yet to transform into a primordial spirit. It was simply unbelievable that Su Qin could kill Kenzu's primordial spirit with the strength of a primordial spirit that had yet to transform into a primordial spirit. Su Qin's expression did not change in the face of the pressure from Patriarch Lei Xing and the other 2. Instead, he asked calmly, "When I left the sea, the 3 of you were the ones following behind me, right? Why didn't you attack back then?" Su Qin looked at the 3 of them with interest. "What does the destruction of Wanjian School have to do with us? As long as you don't continue to destroy other great sects, it's fine." The Kuragenkyo Patriarch looked indifferent. "But this fire elemental source and the core area of the land of great battle are very important to us. and even related to whether we can pass it down for generations. If we hand it over to you again, we will feel very uneasy. Black origin sects' abyssal ancestor only said a few words to clearly explain their intentions. To put it simply, there were not enough benefits. At their level, which one of them would not weigh the pros and cons? Before Su Qin left the sea, no one stopped him because it was not worth it. Even if they attacked Su Qin at that time, what was their purpose? To avenge Wanjian's school? How was this possible? But now, the fire elemental source in front of them was enough for them to fight. Even if they had to pay a price for it, they could bear it. After all, this was a fire elemental source. In the previous era of vitality recovery, even Earth Immortals would fight for it. Even for Earth Immortals, the 5 elemental sources were precious. Even if they did not use it themselves, they could give it to their younger disciples. I see. Su Qin looked up at the 3 of them. In that case, all of you can stay. Since the transformation of the primordial spirit, Su Qin had been thinking about how strong he was. He did not expect that now there would be 3 peak myths who had transformed into primordial spirits. This was exactly what Su Qin wanted. Oh! It seems that you do not agree with the conditions that we have offered? The Xianxia patriarch's face sank, and a huge power rose into the sky in an instant, covering 100 miles in an instant. Once a peak myth who had transformed into primordial spirit releases his power, how terrifying would it be? All the myths on the scene were pale, and even a peak myth like the old man Fei you could not stand still. Boom! The next moment, not only the Xianxia patriarch Yuan, but also the patriarch of the Snow God Palace and Raytheon's patriarch Lei Xing began to release their power, faintly suppressing Su Qin. In an instant, within 100 miles, all living things bowed their heads. Even in Chang and city hundreds of miles away, millions of people could faintly feel an oppressive aura passing over, as if the heavens were angry. Not good. Retreat. Many legends struggled to break free, and their legs went soft as they fled into the distance. When everyone retreated dozens of miles away, they reluctantly stopped and looked at the battlefield with palpitations. Do you think that the myth of the Empire of Tang can withstand the joint attack of the 3 patriarchs? A myth whispered. The myth of the Empire of Tang is powerful, but the 3 of them are at the same level. This is an eternal trap. Almost all Earth Immortals have the possibility of dying. How can the myth of the Empire of Tang be an exception? Just as everyone was discussing in a low voice. On the battlefield, the aura of Raytheon's patriarch Lei Xing and the other 2 became heavier and heavier, as if the sky was pressing down and overturning everything. What a pity! The patriarch of the Snow God Palace shook his head slightly at Su Qin. You had the hope of becoming an Earth Immortal. With the strength that Su Qin had shown, coupled with his vigorous blood and qi and Shouyuan's strength, he might really have the hope of taking that step under the recovery of the vitality tide. But the patriarch of the Snow God Palace said that it was a pity. What was the reason? Everyone on the scene understood. This time, they would certainly go all out. Even if Su Qin did not die, he would be suppressed and cut off the possibility of further progress. Su Qin still stood quietly in the same place. His expression was still indifferent. When the aura of the 3 patriarchs fell 10 feet around him, it suddenly turned into a breeze and gently brushed his face. The Xianxia patriarch Yuan found that something was wrong. Su Qin's expression was too calm, as if he was not facing the killing trap set up by the 3 of them, but just an ordinary scene. Let's attack together. The Abyss ancestor of the Dark Source sect took a step forward. His figure changed, and he turned into a 3-meter-tall monster. The monster's body was illusory, but its aura was deep. It was like a black abyss, swallowing all the qi in all directions. Body of succubus? The people watching the battle dozens of miles away immediately recognized the means of the patriarch Yuan. The incubus physique was even more powerful and strange than the demonic illusory physique. If the demonic illusory physique was merely a transition between reality and illusion, then the incubus physique was a complete separation from the human race and a transformation into another race called the incubus. Clatter! As the Patriarch Yuan showed the body of Succubus, a strange and terrifying aura slowly spread out. The world seemed to have come from reality to a dream. Compared to the movement caused by the Patriarch Yuan's attack, the Patriarch of the Snow God Palace was much calmer. An icicle suddenly appeared in front of her. The icicle was only the size of a palm, but its whole body was as vast and magnificent as an ice field. An aura that could freeze the world circulated around the icicle. Finally, Raytheon's Patriarch Lei Xing attacked. The terrifying and dazzling thunderbolt power suddenly burst out, and the world seemed to be filled with endless thunderbolts. Even the Abyss Ancestor's power of nightmare was overshadowed by this thunderbolt and kept retreating. Rumble. The three peak legends who had transformed into the primordial spirit attacked together. This kind of power was simply earth-shattering. Even the many legends who were watching the battle dozens of miles away felt that the internal force was changing slowly. Obviously, they were affected. It's too terrifying. The legend of the Empire of Tang will definitely die. One of the legends said resolutely. No one could think of the possibility that Su Qin could break the killing trap. However, in the face of this earth-shattering scene, Su Qin's expression didn't change. His eyes were still calm. He raised one hand and clenched his palm into a fist. The terrifying power of qi and blood gathered in his right fist, and then a large amount of primordial spirit power was constantly poured in. Suddenly, it was as if an ancient god was hammering the sky. Su Qin's fist lightly hit the Patriarch Lei Xing and the other two. Under everyone's shocked gaze, the body of the Patriarch Yuan of the Xianxia who attacked first suddenly exploded. Endless power of the Patriarch Yuan flashed and finally condensed into a new Patriarch Yuan a few miles away. But at this moment, the Patriarch Yuan's face was as pale as paper and his aura was weak. It was obvious that he had been seriously injured. But this was not the end. Then the Patriarch of the Snow God Palace shot out an icicle and the remaining fist instantly imprinted on her body. Suddenly, her body began to collapse. Only an illusory primordial spirit quickly escaped and stared at Su Qin in horror. Only the Patriarch Lei Xing of the Raytheon, who was the furthest away from Su Qin, barely resisted the punch. But even so, he was still in a mess and his aura was constantly fluctuating. Apparently, he was still injured. There was dead silence. Everyone was dumbfounded as if they had seen a miracle. Su Qin had seriously injured three peak legends who had transformed into the primordial spirit with just one punch? How incredible was this? Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.